Welcome! We're delighted to have you here for this seminar on enhancing the workforce, focusing specifically on how we can leverage the military population and enable them to success in the healthcare sector. Today I have Kate Hatton. She is the Executive Director of the Peak Military Care Network, and she helps connect military service members and veterans with resources in the community to enable their families and their spouses to success, both in the military and beyond. Thank you so much for being here today, Kate.
Happy to be here.
So we know that people transitioning from military life to civilian life encounter a lot of challenges, not only just in the workplace, but also it's a broad personal change as they transition out of military life. So there's two different areas I think that we'll talk about. First is the licensure and education piece and actually finding a remarkable job and employer that they can thrive in. And then also dealing with the cultural and organizational shifts that go from switching from military life to civilian life. So let's talk a little bit about the licensure piece first. So what are some gaps and challenges for service members that are transitioning to civilian life after a military career?
Well, I think it depends on the career field in particular, but in healthcare there's a lot of training that goes on in the military, and there's a lot of overlap between civilian training, whether you're a doctor or a dental hygienist or an x-ray technician, but knowing what the requirements are within each state, particularly as you've gone from different states and where you land, knowing what those requirements are and what you need to do to get that certification or that license can sometimes be daunting, particularly if it's not that clear. So really trying to understand what the process is and having the states make that information clear, whether you need an additional certification or how do you explain what that training is that you received in the military and that equals a CNA or some other job description that already exists. And so do you have to go through that whole training process to become a paramedic or an EMT or some other position, or do you already have that training and don't need to go through it again and just need to take a test or somehow get that license? So that's one of the biggest challenges.
Right. And there's been some recent legislation like HB 16-1197 that influences that?
Yes, that was a recent bill. Actually, the governor's signing tomorrow that really tries to ensure that the regulatory agencies make that process more clear and really know what it is, so that if somebody comes in and says that they had a certain career field in the military, that is equal or equivalent to something else. You only need one more class to be able to have that certain certification, or what exactly it will take, or that all of the requirements for that license or certification can be met with that military training, and it's just a smoother, simpler, more streamlined process to be able to access and be able to work here in this community.
So what are some remaining gaps from the employer perspective? How do employers, if I'm a healthcare leader and I want to make sure that I'm providing opportunities to people in the military, what should I do? What would be some best practices?
I think we've talked about that a lot in terms of some of that really is the culture piece too. It's maybe easy to hire a veteran and maybe harder to retain a veteran, making sure that the experience that they've had in the military, particularly if they've been involved in any trauma, that they're supported and know how to do that. And I know I'm kind of probably jumping ahead to your other questions. But if you've been in the military for a long time, that's your family, that's your world, that's what you've known for a long time, and you're basically going through a career change after 20 years, and that's a difficult thing to do. Never having had to have written a resume before, now having to do that. So helping with smooth that transition and working and making sure that, we all have our own acronyms, but making sure that it's written in civilian language. And then also making sure that HR managers understand that military and veteran culture. If someone does slip back into some jargon or some military language, they know exactly what they're talking about, or can say, hey, maybe I didn't understand that. Does this mean this? Right. So it's almost a language barrier. But trying to
having that patience to have that dialogue.
Exactly.
Could you explain more about what this means?
And as you've hired a veteran or a military spouse too, making sure that they feel comfortable and welcome in that environment. And that's not just a one-time thing, and recognizing the service and the sacrifices that they've made over the years. It's really something important and it means a lot.
Absolutely. I was actually, in preparing for this, reading some research about preparing people, military service members and veterans, and it talked about the importance of strengths-based coaching. So asking military people to think about what their strengths are, what they enjoy, what they liked the most about the military experience, and then being able to apply that into healthcare. So that could be another avenue as well.
Sure, and a lot of military, their own individuality takes a back seat to the team environment and focusing on the mission. So sometimes it's hard to talk about their skills and what they do and what they bring to the table. So getting them to be able to speak in the I first person to
Right.
say, this is what I do. I do bring a lot to the table, and it's not about sacrificing themselves for the team, but being that asset and being able to explain that. It's a culture shift too.
Right, that's interesting because we think about that in the organizational space with looking at different cultures, that some are more collectivist oriented and think in terms of the we, and that can definitely put a wrench in measuring things in certain ways, whereas the United States in general is more of an individualist society, but the military would definitely be an exception where you're thinking more in terms of the we, and I could see how having my background in industrial organizational psychology, how that would influence the hiring process.
Absolutely. How selling themselves is something
Yeah.
that's a new experience.
Yeah, definitely. And especially with so many people going into the military right away after high school or even in high school, it's a huge culture shift. So let's talk a little bit about military spouses. What are some challenges that they face in the workforce?
I think that licensure and that career portability is another issue. They've gone and lived in a lot of different places and followed their spouse's career throughout the nation and the world, and maybe they're missing a gap. They couldn't work in a certain community for a certain period of time because they didn't have a license that was recognized by that state. So now there's a gap in career, just being able to explain what that gap was, or even getting over the hurdle of, oh, you're a military spouse, so you're only going to be here for a year and a half or 2 years, I'm not going to hire you. When reality is that military spouses work in jobs as much as, if not longer, than
Absolutely.
civilians do too. So some of that is just getting over some of the perceptions of what military spouses have and bring, but also being able to, it's hard when you travel and move, every few years to have a longevity in a career and then be able to understand the different requirements in all of the different states, whether you are a healthcare provider or a behavioral health provider, whether you're an LPC or, again, acronym, sorry, but you're a
Right.
counselor, a social worker, or other career fields too. It's making sure that you can work in the community you're in.
Right. So switching to that cultural difference, and just there's a huge difference in how work is accomplished in a military organization versus a civilian private organization. What are some of the most common barriers that people face and struggle with?
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
Oh,
off
no.
there. Anecdotally, we've heard some of the challenges are that, particularly for medical providers too, that, when I was in the military, I could order somebody to follow that care plan or to take that medication, and I had there was more accountability there, but now they don't necessarily have that. So why didn't you go to physical therapy? So those are sorts of things that we
can't
hear
force them.
anecdotally so that's a challenge. And just really, again, that different sense of family and that different culture, and it's a little bit more hierarchical in structure. And so it's a culture shift. It really is a life change shift, but also trying to make sure that person understands new culture they're in as much as the new culture understands where someone has been. So it's a learning curve for everybody.
Absolutely. Has there been any developments with mentoring programs or ways, especially in the Colorado Springs area? I imagine there could be the potential to hook, to network people together where you could be with someone who became a nurse or a similar role before you and use them as a resource?
I think that's definitely a best practice across career fields, so
Right.
that you can have somebody that you can talk to that's lived your experience and knows what you've been through. That certainly helps, particularly with retention and making sure someone feels comfortable and it's a good fit for them. So that mentorship is really, I think, important.
Absolutely. So what are some strengths that military service members bring to the table that you know from your experience working with the community, with employers, and with the service members themselves that make it advantageous to hire them?
Sure, I think they're definitely very, very skilled and very valuable members of our community. And where we talked about that as kind of being hard to get over the interview process of having that team focus, that really helps in the workplace a lot. Really having that focus on what is the mission, what is our greater good here, what are we trying to accomplish. But really the skill sets that are brought in, they're a lot of times under duress. They've got a lot of experience that is very valuable, and they can impart a lot of that experience. And having lived and seen different cultures, been in different parts of the world and different communities and worked with a lot of different folks, I think that really brings a lot to the table in terms of their experience and background.
Absolutely. What are some other suggestions for employers that are wanting to support military service members as much as possible as they make this transition?
I think some things that we've talked about is recognizing that service and honoring that service, and not just saying thank you for your service, which frankly can sometimes sound trite, even though it's, I don't think, intended that way at all. But some organizations do things like they the Friday before Mother's Day is Military Spouse Appreciation Day. So that's a good way to honor military spouses and just recognize some things around. But not just wait till Veterans Day to say thank you to veterans, but just to kind of recognize where they've been, and that mentorship as well, I think it's a good piece of it. So really just trying to note that and remember where folks may have been, whether they've served in harm's way or not. They've put a lot of sacrifice into serving their country and bring a lot to the table, and just being able to recognize that.
Absolutely. Are there any resources for people in the community that are transitioning beyond, and you know, there's your organization?
Sure, obviously there's a lot at the Pikes Peak Workforce Center. There are other organizations. USO has a USO 6 program, tries to help newly transitioning service members, as you know, Mount Carmel is a facility where people can come and get assistance. So in terms of the workforce transition and making sure that there's successful transitions, but the Peak Military Care Network as well, really trying to look at the big picture and manage expectations, not just around, there are different things in the military, things that come with pay, like a housing allowance and different things like that, or you know, where going to the commissary and having different benefits, and what really everything's going to cost when you get out in the real world, if you will, but helping, you know, with managing those expectations. And there are a tremendous amount of supports. The Peak Military Care Network has more than 30 partner agencies who all have a piece of supporting service members, veterans, and families. So there is a tremendous amount of support in this community to help. There are transition programs at the military installations that also help with not just spouses, but the family members and the transitioning service members themselves. So really there's a lot of resources. It's just making sure you know that's available and using them. Take advantage of them. Don't wait until something seems not right.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for your time and sharing all your resources here today.
Happy to do it.
And we thank you for your time, and we hope to have the opportunity to network with you online or at one of our events to support this initiative. And this is, again, part of a larger series that you can see on our site about everything relating to making Colorado Springs and beyond a remarkable, high-performing healthcare sector. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to getting to meet you.